but that is to be expected. I mean, it applies to all. And I joined JNU. There were about 4 of us who were the initial professors who joined. And I spent 21 years at JNU. And let me say that quite honestly, I do not regret a single moment of those 21 years. It was for me, intellectually and otherwise, an extremely exciting time in my life. Challenged, of course, as we all were, by all kinds of things, and the excitement of being alive at that time, of building a new institution, a new university, was tremendously exciting. Now, Peter asked me to talk about what it was like in those years, right in the beginning, possibly the first year when we started off. We started off in 1971, and I think that it was a great good fortune of this university that our first Vice-Chancellor was not an academic, but was a diplomat, Bhattacharya. Because in a sense, he brought a dimension into the university which was very, very different from the kind of more narrowly educational academic dimensions that many other universities had. But paradoxically, in spite of his bringing in this different dimension, it did become a center of academic excellence. Literally, not in the UGC sense, but literally it was a center of academic excellence. And I'd like to just spend a few minutes trying to analyze why that happened, what he did, and what he said to us that made us reach out beyond the normal. First of all, he said to us that JNU is to be a national university. We will have students coming from every part of the country. And therefore, all the obsessions that we have with metropolitan culture and metropolitan students and so on, we would have to rethink those and rethink them in terms of the nuances of students coming from a variety of regions at different levels of life and different types of cultures. And this was absolutely true. Again, one of the interesting things was that when we recruited from all over, it was the excitement of meeting students whom we hadn't met in the metropolitan centers, and what they conveyed to us and how they shaped our kind of thinking. We were also told by Mr. Bhattacharya that we must invent, construct, create brand new courses and syllabi. He said, I don't want a repetition of any university in this country. And in those days, of course, there were far fewer, and we could have imitated some, but we were told absolutely not. We had to have new courses, we had to have new ways of teaching, and we had to make sure that research had its place in all of this, because research, as we all know, is the spine of a university. So how are we going to put this together? New courses meant, of course, that you didn't take the old courses and chop them into half because it was a semester system and not a year-long system. The kind of thing that is done these days by many universities which are switching to the semester system. You take the one-year course and you cut it into half. No, you have to think of the course anew, because the idea of having a semester course was that every course has to be geared to an academic question relevant to that discipline, an orientation relevant to that discipline. Therefore, it was extremely difficult. We spent hours, weeks, months, days, knocking our heads together, trying to work out courses that we felt would be viable and yet at the same time would be intellectually exciting. He also said to us that each course has to be completed in one semester. Of course, that is the whole point of the semester system. Therefore, this focus has to be very much stronger than in a syllabus where you go on for 1 year and you can skip 2 or 3 classes and 4 and 5 classes and so on. You couldn't do this in the semester system. It was absolutely framed that way. And then he said to us, I want interdisciplinary courses. And part of this was tied into the fact that we didn't have departments like most universities had, the Department of X, the Department of Y, the Department of Z. We had centers, and the point about the centers was that the interdisciplinary courses would be written into the center. And so we had, for example, in the history center, we had a sociologist. And to begin with, the sociologist said, what shall I do in a history center? And so we started telling him what he could do in the history center, and by the end of 3 or 4 years, we were having a lovely time having a different take on the same kind of social history that we had thought of as historians. So all of this became immensely interesting in terms of how to approach these courses and how to put them together. When we first brought out what later on came to be called the Blue Book, and it then became the Pink Book, I think, people around in other universities said these people are mad. The courses are so new, so experimental, that no student in their senses will want to take them. So when we announced the opening of the curriculum, the opening of classes and so on, we were amazed at the number of students we had who were excited by these new courses. And one of the things I would like to say again and again, as I will do today, that it is very necessary for universities to constantly, every 20, 30 years, revamp the courses, make sure that what they're teaching is relevant, is intellectually viable, is up to the standards of good quality education, and if need be, an old course should be dropped and a new one brought in. Of course, the nice thing about telling us that nobody would come to our courses was that 10 years down the line, practically every central university is busy imitating the courses of JNU. So that really was nice. Now, knowledge advances only by the questioning of existing knowledge. This is something we've all learned and we all know. And we did precisely that. We questioned existing knowledge. And what did we question? In the social sciences, and I'm going to speak only about the social sciences because quite frankly, I don't know what happened in the science schools. I imagine it would be fairly parallel, but I'm only speaking about the social sciences. We inherited a whole legacy of colonial scholarship and nationalist scholarship. And most universities, for example, in the social sciences, disciplines like history and sociology and so on, went along with this legacy and went on teaching it. We started off by saying, is it relevant? Is this the kind of thing we want to teach, or do we want to teach something which has a new approach? And it was that search for a new understanding which really gave us a kind of sense of daring to think independently. And I can only use the word daring because that is what we were always being accused of in the first 2 or 3 years. You are doing things that are too experimental. You are doing things that are really too daring. But the proof of the pudding was in the eating, in the sense that, you know, we had people that were interested. We started doing research along those lines, and the end result was a very positive result. We didn't, in the 70s, by the way, go in for what was very fashionable in those days, to argue that everybody's interpretation and readings of a particular problem have equal value. We argued that the priorities exist in how you interpret something, and that you have to defend your priority by the evidence and the argumentation. And I think that was really a very important and decisive departure from what was happening in many other universities. We had 3 big advantages, I will admit. The courses were new, they were very tough, and the students that we got were genuinely interested in the courses. They came because they said, this is an intellectual enterprise, and we wish to be part of it. And that was really very, very nice indeed. For example, I know in the History Center, it was considered very infra-dig if you were doing history and sitting for the IAS competitive exam. So everybody hid the fact that they were sitting for the IAS competitive exam. And we kept saying to them that, you know, if you take our courses in the social sciences, you won't do well in the IAS exam. You go to the coaching classes, they teach you the correct way of answering questions. But I'm told, alas, that now the IAS examiners have caught up with the JNU syllabus. And so they're all busy doing what we're doing. Ground, and after the first semester, got used to doing it that way. Remember that I'm talking of a period in the 90s. There was post-modernity, and then gradually that moved into post-colonialism. So these were the fashionable theories, which were being English, at least as a library language, if not as students we admitted and the number of faculty we had. And why I say it was an advantage was that in our system of tutorials, for example, the right effective way of teaching, because there was interaction between the three students, something that I think people have to think agreement with the faculty. And I had numerous occasions when I would be lecturing and someone would put up a hand and say, sorry, I don't think I quite agree with you. So I don't know what is going to happen to this, but something will have to be done. Secondly, what this produced was this encouragement to have happy memories of the way in which you related to your teachers. I know as a teacher, and then I would settle down and say, now how can I explain it properly and do it clearly? This was really a challenge. What we did succeed in doing was to question this notion that a student must always be differential. And therefore, what was it that the student expected from the teacher? The teacher was a good teacher, and we really did spend, as teachers, many more man-hours on doing heavy research. We don't need to be constantly saying that, you know, the Ivy League is our model, or Oxford is our model, or whatever. Find ways of how to approach these problems, understand the problems of our times. That was the thrust of what. That openness, that spirit of democracy and questioning what was going on in the world around us, that led us to take a spontaneous and very clearly oppositional position opposing the emergency when it happened. Many universities that way, we made it very clear that we were in fact opposed to it. Now, a university as an institution of society cannot isolate. I remember correctly, and if my reading was right, there were two areas of the society, or Indian society at that time, is reality. Issues relating to social justice became very important in our extracurricular activities and so on. And the second thing, that's the secular in Indian society. This again was a matter. Were in a sense symbolic of the name, the Nehru where Delhi was established. But imagine the difference in polarizing a university and being called Jawaharlal Nehru. And made no bones about the fact that we were opposed. We took it on as a challenge. All right, let me then write the vision that I've been trying to evoke in all that I have said. Let me just say that I think that every institution, anywhere, but more so perhaps in our country, because we're not very good at maintaining institutions. We put them up very quickly and then it all sort of disintegrates. Every institution, I think, with every generation of change, has to ask itself questions about its relevance and about its performance, become very important. What is the experience of our students when they enter a profession? Are they telling us what experiences you have had? And my concluding